All right, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar, the 2025 End of Year Parcel Roast. My name is Taylor Puelka, and I'll be your host today. I'm the VP of Marketing and Alliances at ProShip. Before we get into the meat and potatoes, and before we get into our speakers, a couple housekeeping items. So we are streaming on two places today. We have the webinar platform. If you're on the webinar platform, there is a Q&A box. If you think of anything, submit it. We will get to those at the end of the session. There's also a docs tab in case you want to download some of the really great links that are in there. We're also streaming on LinkedIn Live. So if you're joining us there, there is a chat function that you can chat us if you think of something, if you agree, if you disagree, if you forgot to submit a strategy, please do so. And again, we'll get to those at the end of today. Lastly, just a quick disclaimer. So we have anonymized submissions because this isn't a roast of people, it's a roast of strategies. So if you see something familiar, don't worry, we're laughing with you mostly. You might see your strategy pop up in a couple different places or woven into multiple examples, but we're keeping everything anonymous as possible. The goal today is to have fun, share insights, and learn together. So without further ado, let's get to our panelists. These guys are the Gordon Ramsays of logistics, in my opinion. They've seen every flavor of shipping disaster, and today they're ready to flambe some bad strategies. So Justin, do you want to kick us off with an intro?
Sure. Many of you already know me, but for those of you who don't, I'm co-founder of ProShip, which means I've been in the logistics industry for over 25 years now. In that time, I've had the privilege of working on over 300 individual customers as either selling, architecting, implementing, so on and so forth. Those processes have allowed me to work with single companies that just have a single location, all the way up to companies that have been shipping across 4 continents. Customers who do just a few packages a day, all the way up to customers who have hit over 3 million packages per day. So I've been pretty lucky with my exposure in the industry.
Great, thank you. Michael?
Yeah, hello everyone. I'm Michael Falls, Chief Customer Officer at Reveal. Our company is a shipping intelligence software solution, so that includes everything from analytics to audit to carrier contract strategy and beyond. Over the last decade plus, I've worked with hundreds of shippers, every shape, size, and vertical. And I've seen a lot, I've done a lot, but this is definitely my first time sitting on a roast dais. So excited to be here today. Thanks for having me.
Happy to have you. Jamin?
I'm Jamin Dick, and I lead JDick Advisory. I've been working with brands and retailers to serve their customers via direct-to-consumer e-commerce businesses for the better part of the last 25 years. Now I work with up-and-coming businesses to do the same thing and help them figure out how not to make the mistakes we're going to talk about today. So I think we're going to have some fun.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. All right, with the disclaimers out of the way, the intros out of the way, let's turn up the heat. Grab your popcorn, grab your cocktail. It is happy hour because we're going to dive into the roast now. So let's begin with probably, that was like the biggest group of submissions that we got, where these people, these shippers were very, very much loyal to a single carrier. And this could be for a variety of reasons, but excuses aside, they always seem to assume that their carrier reps have good intentions. So panelists, how have you seen this play out in real life? Let's start with you, Justin.
Yeah, so my first job as a kid was on a car lot. We sold new and used cars, and I just can't help but when I hear customers talk about the trust and the family-like nature that they have with their carrier reps. That's exactly what my car salesman used to work on. I mean, not to push too hard into it. And remember, we're not roasting people. We're roasting ideas here. But this is kind of right up there with going onto the lot and just trusting that car salesman to get you the right car when we all know he's more incentivized rather than selling you that minivan or that SUV for your family of 4. he's a little bit more incentivized to sell you that nice little 2-seater sports car because he makes an extra few bucks there. I just don't see my carrier reps not following that incentive that their companies have put in place for them. So yes, know your carrier reps, know who they know what features and functions they have to offer, but trust them as far as you would any business relationship.
Yeah, Justin, I love that car dealership analogy. I mean, like anyone else, I've spent my fair share of time in car dealerships over the years. And, despite internet being a great equalizer, it always strikes me when I'm going through the car buying experience how the dealer benefits to a certain extent from information asymmetry, right? I mean, they know more than the buyer, and that helps them in the transaction, which is why as a buyer, you probably shouldn't be loyal to a single dealer. Like you said, you should, as the saying goes, you should shop around for the best deal. So it's a simple principle in car buying, and it's one that applies to parcel shipping as well. I'd be you'd be shocked at how many companies with significant parcel spend, and I mean I'm talking in the ballpark of $100 million or more annually, are either single sourced or almost entirely single sourced with either UPS or FedEx. And from time to time, I'll walk into one of these companies' corporate headquarters, and I'll see a picture hanging in the wall on the logistics department wall, where there's an executive at that company shaking hands with an executive from one of the national carriers, typically from a decade or more in the past. And when I see that, I always think the same thing, right? I think, here's your sign. You guys remember that the blue collar comedy tour, Bill Engvall, here's your sign. I mean, there can be some benefits to being entirely or almost entirely a single source shipper. And those deep carrier relationships can result in benefits for the customer, just like in any vendor relationship. But in most cases, and especially when we're talking about an enterprise shipper, the UPS or FedEx customer has to realize that in the land of give and take, there's likely going to be a lot more give and take for the company deploying that single sourcing strategy.
Michael, I think I've got the sign you're looking for here. Oh, and it's going to not work. It says, "This is not fine."
The fire sticker with the dog, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Unfortunately, the logic is pulling it out. It thinks it's background. Yeah. So that's basically a lot. This is not fine. That's your sign for a lot of people.
Yep.
Yeah, I would just add, carriers are, will always claim to be very customer focused, and to some degree they are as far as it goes. But you have to remember, you own the relationship with your customer, and you know your customer best. So what's right for you is what's going to determine what your carrier strategy should be. And I don't know how many times I've seen it where the swag and the baseball games and the dinners kind of cloud what you really should do for your business. And everybody thinks they've got the best rate card and the best relationship, but in the end, you got to think about the customer. And I'll even confess, I remember being this guy early in my career and thinking, these are pretty nice people here, and they're going to take care of my customer. But you get burned on that a couple times, and you start to figure out I should be a little more skeptical.
Yeah, as that skepticism comes into play, I've always got this one thing that I try to tell customers. Your friends don't try to avoid certain things. Your carriers do. And they do that with pricing. They will try to avoid a particular type of package, a particular distance, something of that nature. And if you're single carrier and you have a certain percentage of your packages that fit that we don't like it, you are really paying a lot extra when maybe there's another carrier that could take those packages at a significantly more competitive rate, lowering your overall costs. But then again, you'd have to have more than one carrier.
Right on. Any other thoughts from the team here?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of directions we could go with this. I mean, I've lost track of how many times a customer has told me or my team that, quote, my carrier rep says we have the best rates they've ever seen. Now, in fairness, there are a lot of carrier reps out there. Maybe they just haven't seen better rates. But, I've heard this statement from shippers recently that I've really had to grapple with a little bit, and because I think the principle is good, but the impact in this current carrier pricing climate is really suboptimal. And that's, a shipper will say something to the extent of, hey, I signed a 3-year agreement with my carrier partner. I'm not going to go back to them midterm, to get an amendment or change pricing, because we don't shake down our vendors. We treat our vendors like partners. And if a company chooses to do that, right, because they think that's the right way to do business, that's their decision. But who does do business like that? FedEx and UPS do business like that, right? Like, Justin, I'm going to give you a multiple choice question. Are you ready?
Yeah, sure.
All right. Which one of the following months did UPS and FedEx announce an unexpected pricing adjustment? Was it June, July, August, September, or October? Got 20% odds to get it
I was
right.
just saying, can I go with all the above?
Oh, all right. You got my trick question there. Yeah, it was all of them, right? I mean, it was fuel tables 1 month. It was additional handling and weight thresholds the next. Then it was zone-based large package surcharge. Then it was new demand surcharges. Then the GRIs came out. I mean, we're living in a world of, I've heard people describe it as incremental pricing, whatever term you want to apply to it. FedEx and UPS they've changed the rules, right? It's a revenue quality strategy for them, where they're constantly changing pricing throughout the term with a shipper. And that's not being critical of the carrier strategy. It's just recognizing that is the landscape that we live in, right? And so as a shipper, the sooner you can realize that's the landscape, that's the world in which you're operating, and your carrier partners are expecting you to respond to that, right? Those shippers who are armed with the best data are going to be the ones who are able to go back to their shippers and be adept enough to keep up.
Couldn't agree more, Michael. I think that's a really good point. And, this is where if you do have a good relationship with your rep, it's, good time to sit down and say, hey, the market's really moved here. And I know we have a contract, but, we should have a conversation about this because, it looks like I'm paying you more than the market rate for fuel or whatever.
That's wild out there. Anything else for these single carrier worshippers? Or shall we move on? All right. Well, now that we've covered the number one yikes of the shipping world today, aka shippers who are so dedicated to their carrier of choice, you're adorable but expensive. Let's shift gears to the other end of the spectrum, where there are shippers who are excited about change. They head first into technology without a second thought, with the utmost confidence. So this shipper in particular loves a buzzword. What's the biggest buzzword right now? AI. And is convinced that machine learning can do everything. So this includes predicting the future and maybe even folding your laundry. Panelists, let's unpack the reality behind the mindset of applying AI in logistics. Michael, let's start with you on this one.
Sure. Well, yeah, we're hearing this a lot, right? Especially from prospects who we're talking to in the market, because AI washing is real right now, right? Every company, every software company in our space is promoting AI, right? So I'll preface what I'm going to say here by saying, I think AI has great potential, right? Both in terms of practical use cases today and for the future. And I totally agree with the concept that companies who are going to incorporate AI into their workflows are the ones who are best prepared to lead and win in the future. The CEO of my company has a great saying as it relates to AI. Josh Dunham, our CEO, he says, it's a funny thing with AI. AI is only about 60% right about the things you know everything about, but it's 100% right about the things you know nothing about, right? And his point is that we're at a place with AI where we have the expertise, or when we have the expertise and resources to evaluate its competencies on really complex topics, we realize that it's a tool to utilize and partner with, but it's not ready to outsource our strategic thinking to. But we hear all the time from AI enthusiasts who are convinced that we're ready to outsource everything. Taylor, you mentioned laundry. If we could outsource our laundry to AI, our family life around the Falls household would be optimized for sure. But around things like strategy and analysis and everyday thinking. And so, here's my word of caution. Companies, including companies in our space, parcel spend management, shipping intelligence, companies are preying on these types of people right now. who are all in on AI through, again, AI washing, which if you don't know the term, basically it's when a company markets themselves as using AI when their product really doesn't in the way they advertise. And so, the deal is if you're going to be the AI enthusiast, you better become an AI expert first who can sort the fact from the fiction, or, you're going to find that instead of procuring the right products for yourself, you're going to become the product.
Yeah. The buzzwords out there are amazing. And so my 2 cents here, so you don't end up printing your NFTs on your pet rocks, right? Two really buzzy things back at one point in time that some people made a lot of money on, and a lot of people lost a lot of money on. When we're looking at AI, I'm going to go back to Josh's analogy. 60% of what it's right about. The reality is that's probably the case for everything. Just to put it out there. When we look at AI, it is great at probabilistic things. Okay, that 40% is where we hallucinate. Some people have heard me in the past say, you can't have AI hallucinate a shipping label, right? You can't have AI estimate shipping costs. Okay, so when you have a discrete option out there, you can get the answer. That's where AI shouldn't apply. Okay, AI is not going to be used in your accounting department to create bills, nor does your accounting department want you to calculate shipping costs with AI. They want discrete algorithms that go along with that. So it's really just a matter of using the right tool for the right job. And Michael, you said it, and I'm going to repeat it. There is great use for AI in our modern business society, but it's not going to cover everything. Just like NFTs only made a couple of people rich, AI, when applied in the right spot, will help, but will not help if you try to use it on everything, right? In my Big Fat Greek Wedding, it's not Windex. You can't put it on everything to cure everything.
I'll just add to that. I think there's one end of the spectrum is sort of the AI skeptics who are saying, like, it's just hype and there's nothing there. And then there's the AI sycophants who are like, it's gonna solve every problem. And I think most of us live in the middle there somewhere. We're trying to figure out, where should we apply this? Where does it make sense? I mean, if you've been around it for any length of time, you remember all the different things that we've had that were going to solve every problem. And you mentioned a couple of them, Justin, but raise your hand if you've ever heard, once this new TMS or OMS is in place, we will see all, know all, and rainbows and unicorns will fly out of our customers' orders. So I mean, like, of course, these things you have to think about what's the right application for me. And it could be that it's a while before we have AI replacing things like human decision making about, what should my network look like? What should I do when my parcels are late during holiday? There's a lot of decision making that we just are going to need our teams to do. They might be using AI to support those decisions, but it's still going to be the humans in the seats figuring out what's right for your customer.
Jamin, as Claude would say, you're absolutely right. I think that's another problem we have with AI is AI has such a high level of sycophancy. It feels good to not only get this answer that sounds right to you, but also be told that your question is super intelligent. Now, I'm not saying there's such a thing as a bad question, but what I am saying is if a human were to speak to you like that, you probably wouldn't trust them. Okay. And to pull a quote from Reagan back in the 80s, with AI, you need to trust but verify. You need to run it past an expert to say, is this the 40% where it's wrong and is going to lead me down that path, a path that's going to cost me a lot of money? Or is it that 60% where there's really some good insight here because all of us knows more than one of us kind of thing, right? And that's really what AI is large language models. There's so much information available there. But where is it telling you what you want to hear versus where it's hallucinating and it's telling you that you have created room temperature fusion?
Yeah, and we got a question that's really specific to this. I think I'm just going to ask you guys now instead of waiting till the end. Do you have a specific example with logistics? Is there a good part of it to use for AI? Is that like reporting, creating redundant shipments? Is there a good use case today that you're seeing AI being really useful?
I'm going to steal this real quick because I know that Michael and Jamin have a significantly broader portion of the logistics world. From shipment execution, there is one clear place to add AI, and that is in time and transit. Everything else, the costs, the labels, the EDI, all of these other parts are discrete pieces, but understanding what that time and transit could be could allow you to move to a lower cost carrier service level, and leverage that with a higher probability, because let's face it, delivery times are probable anyway, for your customers. Mike or Jamin?
Yeah, I have just one thing I would add there is probably the most immediate use that I've seen is just, kind of dirty, unstructured data, throw it in there to get an answer. And there's a lot of that in logistics, right? If you've got a multi-carrier environment, you're going to get multiple different types of files back from different carriers, and AI can help with that. I think it's easier than trying to normalize it in some database. And so I think a lot of people will use it for that for quite a while. That's how I use it. And there's probably better uses coming, but that's what I use it for right now.
Yeah, no, I mean, Jamin, along those lines, I think, especially leveraging or gaining insights into large data sets, especially when you're looking to compare period over period. I mean, a lot of times shippers need to understand, hey, what changed week over week, or this period this year over this period last year? What was different? What was the factor that led to an increase in pricing or a decline in transit performance? And answering those questions really quickly rather than having to have an analyst, do a deep dive into the data. Yeah, that's the best application in our space.
So something you guys both did there is you both used AI as an advisory role, human in the loop. Sorry, Jamin, go ahead.
Well, yeah, that's exactly right. And I also think on the back end, everybody engages with, parcel and freight audit companies. And I think that's a good thing to do for sure. But I've also used it in that regard as well. You just take your own data and feed it in there. You don't have to pay a fee for that.
Yeah, I mean, there's some benefit to that as well. I think it's both and, Jamin. I mean, you talk about using unstructured data sets. I think really the power of AI is when you actually have structured data sets that are really clean, really normalized, but they're too large to make sense of, and you want to do really complex analysis and modeling over long periods of time and forecast out into the future. You can do that, right, with a partner in, call it, the parcel spend management space, who's cleaning, normalizing the data, and then putting these modeling capabilities on top of it. So I think there's a room for both and, for sure.
Yeah.
Admittedly, I'm self-interested. I'm in the parcel spend management space. So.
And by the way, I've never not used a parcel spend management provider. I mean, I think I agree, but there are times when you just want to know, is there a there? Is it worth it? How much of a prize is there in my parcel spend? And most of the time I found, oh yeah, it's bigger than I thought. And that's where you need a partner to get involved.
Well, here's the litmus test, and here's where I'll bring it back to the roast. If you can do the same thing your parcel auditor or parcel spend management provider is doing in Claude or in ChatGPT, then you probably don't need that provider, right? But if they're providing value above and beyond that because they're contributing to the data stream and the value stream along the way, then there's room for both and, right? So put everyone to the test out there.
Thanks, Jody. That was a good question.
It was.
Yeah, thanks, Jody. All right, I'm sure we could talk about AI forever, but we got to move on. We got a couple more shipper strategies to roast. So let's go to the shipper who has every carrier connected via API instead of a platform connection. It's all APIs, because if it's connected, it means it's working, right? Jamin, what's the problem with equating this type of tech with reliability?
Yeah, I think the biggest issue here, and I see this all the time. I've lived this personally. It's like, well, we've got a new system, so everything is going to be fine, or we've tested this system, so the tests say it's going to be fine, and it misses an entire quadrant of what needs to happen, which is, are your operations supporting that system in the appropriate way. And one of the biggest areas is just data analysis. Does your team know how to use it? And so many people spend millions of dollars on these implementations, but they don't have the muscle memory internally to be able to leverage that data when the time comes, when there's a problem in the operations, when a truck goes missing or something like that, and you got to figure out what was on that truck. There's a lot of that has to be. There needs to be sort of a playbook internally that supports the technology. And I think people think the tech is going to do all the work. And like we've talked about here, no, that's where human judgment is still incredibly important for that.
Yeah, and let's not talk about the fact that two things: reliability and automation. Okay, here we are a week before Thanksgiving, and well, let's just say one of the carrier APIs is running at 1.19 seconds. Okay, I don't usually talk in seconds as a software engineer. I talk in milliseconds, and so that's 1,190 milliseconds. Okay, not to mention the fact that almost every carrier's API in the next 2 months is going to either have an extreme slowdown or small amounts of blackout. Okay, so reliability is something that you have to think about. Are you ready to send everybody to lunch 2 hours early, 2 hours late, when those things happen? But also, well, let's say we want less of those people basically just being human label applicators. So we automate that. Okay, well, if we're automating that, if we're taking those humans and we're moving them to pick, pack, and quality assurance, okay, now what do we have? We have a bottleneck at the printer applicator, right? Printer applicators generally are sub 4 seconds. Okay, we're seeing a lot of sub 2 seconds. Well, if you got 1.19 seconds just to pull a rate and another 1.19 seconds to apply that label, well, guess what? You just hit the jackpot. So your hospital lane is just going to start pouring with packages, right? That's why we call it the jackpot lane, right? Because when something goes wrong, when those APIs go out, guess what? Everything pours to the jackpot lane. And now all those people that you've moved forward in the process to provide value where humans can provide value, you're going to have to take them away. And you're going to have to manually process those packages in a slower but more error-resistant manner.
Boy, you're giving me a twitch. This reminds me of some holiday peaks recently. And Katie, I see your question. What do you do when it goes down, when the API goes down? I think you go into a broom closet and scream into the void for a minute, and then rejoin your team with hopefully a better look on your face. But it can be pretty harrowing. You're exactly right. I've had that exact situation happen, and it came from overconfidence on our partners sometimes, and sometimes on ourselves, and just a lack of skepticism about what can break when you really need it to work.
And to answer Jody's question, there are three types of technology out there, if you will. There's carrier APIs, which I think everybody with a mid-sized business is used to at this point in time. There's a lot of products out there, multi-carrier shipping products, that just consolidate those APIs. Okay. There's also the other extreme, which is a 100% on-platform solution where your multi-carrier shipping vendor has the ability to actually produce the labels, calculate the costs, and create EDI. Okay, so this is asynchronous, if you will. Doesn't matter if the carriers are up; they could be down for 2 or 3 days. That EDI is always ready to send to the carriers asynchronously. Okay, and then there's a hybrid solution that can use a little bit of both, right? A little bit of that premise and a little bit of those APIs where necessary. If there's something that's only available via API, yes, when the carrier goes down, you may not be able to use multi-package dangerous goods from a carrier that's uses a similar color as my shirt at this point in time. But that's a very small use case, And so most of your packages, 80% of your packages now are still moving. You're still getting progress, right? You don't have to melt away into a corner and disappear. Okay. You can keep working. You can keep making your customers happy. And then you can deal with the significantly smaller set of error cases and try to accelerate them or things of that nature.
I see Jody's asked a good architecture question, which I'm not the right one to answer that, but I would say I've used ShipStation before, and I've used many other partners in the past. And I think the question that needs to get answered when you're making those kinds of decisions is when I'm adding another layer. So I've got the carriers and now I've got another layer. Am I adding complexity or am I making it better? And it can be either one. I mean, sometimes an API broker or somebody in the middle is actually helping the situation. But I've seen those things get stacked up to the point where, now it's going through those two systems, plus you've got your internal system, sometimes multiple layers there. And if there's, compounding latency in those systems, you can end up really creating a sort of a Rube Goldberg machine that can go wrong at the wrong times.
Japanese, you just put T-balls up here for me, okay? Because that's one of my areas of expertise is the structure of an enterprise software stack, the systems analysis of said enterprise software stack. So a product like that product, they're a competitor of mine, so I won't call them out because again, we're looking at concepts, not individual products or companies. They can allow you, if carrier purple is down, you can switch to brown, you can switch to blue and white, you can switch to so on and so forth. So there is already, by using a multi-carrier shipping software, there's a little bit of built-in redundancy. Okay. Now the question is, how much do you need? Going back to the car analogy, do you just need an economy two-seater? Because you're just you and you just want to get great gas mileage? Or do you have a family of four and you need a minivan or an SUV or something of that nature? Or, are you now empty nester and now's the time to get that two-seater sports car? You really need to understand what your need is during the failure to determine what the correct answer is. And yes, if your enterprise software stack doesn't have appropriate separation of concerns, so ERP data goes in one spot, inventory data goes in another spot, et cetera, no matter, regardless of what system you use, you're going to have a bad time in the event of failure.
Good answer.
All right. Okay, one more, Jody. One more for this section, then we got to move on. Question: do you recommend more than one software like this outside of your primary ShipStation vendor, or for a backup, or what do you do? So
this is where I would and understand ProShip is a multi-carrier shipping software, which goes from API through hybrid to all on-platform components. Clearly, we would recommend somebody like ourselves because we have that experience. But again, are you looking to? We do understand that we are not the Honda Accord on the lot. We are priced more in the Cadillac area. So I can't say anything bad about the Honda Accord because it's a great car. Okay, and it serves its purpose, but it's not going to have the luxury comfort that you would expect at the higher end. It's not going to have the options, the features. It's not going to have the four-wheel drive to get you out of that problem. I'm sorry, the all-wheel drive to get you out of the snow and ice problem. It may not have as much of those amenities as you're looking for. So I would say that having multiple systems can be an option. For your higher end systems, that should not be a requirement because the higher end system should be built with failure in mind.
Justin, I don't know whether you sold ProShip right now, but I think you convinced a few of us to buy a new car.
I know. I was going to say, can everyone tell that he loves cars?
Love
All
it.
right. Let's move on to our next roast candidate. So, shippers who live in constant reaction mode. Every day feels like a fire drill, and planning is kind of like a backseat. They'll plan for the day, maybe the week, but not an overall strategy, really. So, what about the shipper who's one trailer pull away from a meltdown? They hold everything together with duct tape. Duct tape is great, except in the shipping world, hoping nothing changes, which is exactly probably what's going to happen to you, especially during peak. Justin, how does the front of line planner set themselves up for failure?
Okay, this is the person who thinks that things aren't going to change in the next week, month, day, right? I'm sorry, right now we've have a lot of customers that are calling us for that. We're just now need a refresher on how we change last carrier pull times, how we adjust and tweak these things that usually we only do during peak. So it's not an uncommon request that for this time of year, because things are changing, because that front of line planning, right? I think it was Eisenhower that said, plans are useless. Planning is invaluable, right? Or overly valuable, however you want to, whatever that word is. It's not coming to me. But the idea here is that if you expect things to go perfectly throughout the day, you're not going to you're not going to be able to take advantage of positive changes on your side. What's an example of a positive change? If you have multiple trailers pulled during a day and a carrier says, hey, we'll add one more trailer for you today and we'll pull 2 hours later. Okay, what does that do? Especially if that's your lowest cost carrier. What does that do for your logistics costs that day? Okay. On the other hand, you've horse traded that later carrier pull today for a earlier carrier pull tomorrow. Now it's tomorrow. What are you going to do? You're going to try to plan all that out? Or would you rather have a solution that as those packages are crossing the scale, is going to say, okay, what carriers do I have? Which carriers are today? Which carriers are the next business day, right? What's the lowest cost? What's my customer expectation? And given all of that data, this is your label that is going to give you the lowest cost to meet or exceed that customer's expectation based upon now, not 8 o'clock in the morning, not yesterday, not last week. Okay. That's really what I think a lot of these planners can't understand, that, a plan never, how does another one go? Everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face, right? No plan makes it past first contact. So if your systems won't adjust with those left hooks, with those with the line in front of you all of a sudden that you didn't expect, are you really going to get the best out of your shipment execution, or are you just going to suffer because you can't make changes?
Can I just want to add one thing here? Sorry, Michael. Just real quick on this.
Justin, if you really wanted a great metaphor, you just should have said, what would happen if the wheels fell off the Honda Accord? It was waiting out there for you, but missed it.
Nice.
Go ahead.
Cars.
That's right. Yeah. So, I mean, this is part of me wants to defend the reactive shipper a little bit here, because I've never met any supply chain person who was able to plan their supply chain so well that they just skated through and there was never a problem in the Suez Canal or a huge snowstorm or a hurricane. I mean, but that being said, it's not about how well you prevent things from happening. It's more about how well are you positioned to not be fragile when things do happen, and I think that's the issue here. Is too many people right now forever are their best case scenario people. They've got, if everything goes right, we're going to have a great holiday. Well, have you met anybody like that? I mean, it never happens. And so I think it's just important to be thinking about stuff's going to happen. Do we have the resilience internally and in our supply chain, in our network, to be able to absorb it and pivot when things happen?
Yeah. And if you do it right, the system will absorb and pivot for you, right? If we have rules that are more conceptually based, I want to use the lowest cost carrier. I need to meet this time. And then the reality is the data changes and the rules react to the data rather than you having hard coded those rules. You have a better time. You may not like the results of how the data has changed, but you know that as the data changes, the business rule is going to continue to do the best for you, right? It is a little bit of trust. It is a little something that I recommend somebody, start with Mother's Day, start with your 4th of July peak. Don't make this for your Christmas peak, right? Test those things out at those lower times and understand them. But if you try to hold on, right? When you try to hold on to a clump of sand, it's all going to come through your fingers. Michael, I don't really know how to make that one involve a Honda Accord.
All right. Anyone else on this topic? If not, I'm going to move on. All right. So we started out the roast today with shippers who were very much single carrier shippers. But what about the shipper that's stuck in the eternal loop of chasing better rates, having more RFPs than carrier pickups? Sounds a little bit like commitment issues. Michael, have you seen this? I'm sure you have. You're in the space that you probably have seen this multiple times. How does this impact shipping strategies?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's the chasing better rates with carriers, which, to the earlier point of the conversation, I mean, right now there are so many pricing changes being introduced that it is really an ongoing, pricing negotiation situation with your carriers. But I've seen a lot of shippers where it's just constant, vendor RFPs across the entire kind of supply chain tech space, right? And I think it's actually kind of funny, right? I think a lot of us probably know people like this where they've kind of figured out, hey, if I'm in a constant RFP cycle, well, hey, I'm probably being wined and dined by, my prospective vendor or carrier. That's pretty nice. Jamie, you mentioned that one earlier. If I'm constantly in an RFP cycle, I'll always feel wanted. I mean, everyone likes that. If I'm constantly in an RFP cycle, I'll always keep my vendors on their toes, right? They're always going to be scrambling to support me because they know I'm bidding out the business. And if I'm constantly in an RFP cycle, I'll always have a meaningful project to tell my boss about, which is, that equates to job security. And I say these things tongue in cheek, but I know that this thought process is going through some people's minds. And so, what I'd say to that is that at the end of the day, carriers and frankly, any vendor in this space must be viewed as an important partner entrusted to be an extension of an organization's goals. I think supply chain operations are, as much as any competency or discipline, a people business as much as a technology business. And so constantly cycling or switching, chasing a better deal, it damages your reputation and damages your own leverage points. It limits what carriers and vendors are willing to offer. And, in the case of carriers, it means their revenue is less reliable, right? So you can't have an everything with everyone all the time strategy. I think, vendor relationships should follow the hire slow, fire fast business principle. Take the time to pick the right vendor relationships. When they work, keep them for the long term, obviously modifying terms along the way. But if there are question marks on the front end, leave yourself an out so that if that relationship doesn't work, you can move on to one that will work for the long term.
Yeah, Michael, many of us have that friend that went through like 10 majors in college, and they're not a master of anything, right? I think in the world of logistics, if you're a logistics master, you are a logistics manager, you have to be a master of logistics. You have to understand the data flow, the carriers, the options that are available to you. And if you are cycling through carriers like socks, right, you're never going to be with one of them long enough to truly understand their strengths and weaknesses. So I agree with you. Hire slow, fire fast, but spend enough time so you really understand what that carrier can do for you. That being said, we've got a question. I'm going to throw this one over to Jamin because we talked about this earlier in the prep about And we talked about you have $10 million or $100 million in logistics spend. What about the other side? Should I diversify my carriers all the time?
Yeah. Yeah, this is a super important question, and we sort of kicked off with the overly loyal single carrier person. This is sort of the question for the other side, and I'll raise my hand and say I'm the first one to say let's try a multi-carrier strategy, and I think that makes sense when you've got the volume for it. And I've seen this problem happen where you've got somebody comes from a Walmart.com or Amazon or something like that, where it's hyper multi-carrier, and then you come to some place that's maybe they're $500,000,000 business, which feels big, but if you're chopping up your parcel volume into 5 different carriers, that means you're using up a lot of doors at your DCs. You're using up, you're not using your trailers on the outbound side. They're probably not full, and you're not as important to any of your carriers anymore. So there is a lower end to this where, being multi-carrier doesn't make sense. And so, just because that play made a lot of sense in a very large brand or retailer, it doesn't mean it makes sense for everybody. And so there is a point at which you say, you know what, I'm just adding complexity to my world and overhead, and I'm not actually solving a problem. I'm actually creating more problems. So I definitely think that's an important consideration for mid to small shippers.
Yeah, no, all great points. I mean, I would just add to that and say, the goal itself, the end goal cannot be carrier diversification, right? You've got to keep the end goals, customer experience, profitability, efficiency, right? If carrier diversification supports, those end goals, then sure, explore a carrier diversification strategy. I mean, to your point, Jody, there's a lot of complexity there, right? Depending on the size of your program, there may be revenue tiers in play, right? Volume commitments, there may be rebates at play. I mean, there's a lot to balance, let alone you may negotiate different types of discounts with different carriers. So within the complexity, the data is really important, understanding the data, and again, modeling out that data so you really know how is this going to play out. So, I mean, don't get me wrong, plenty of shippers should have a wide diversification strategy, right? And that includes the national players, regional carriers, consolidators, local carriers. I mean, they all have their place. But for the people on this call looking ahead to 2026 with a carrier diversification initiative, just go through that 5 whys exercise, right? The root cause analysis. Make sure you're backtracking to the end goal in mind, which again, customer experience, profitability, efficiency. And if it's supporting those objectives, then great.
All right. And okay, I just kind of messaged this. What was that quote you had? Because when we were doing like the prep, it just resonated really well. I don't want you to forget it.
Sure. John Wooden, famous UCLA college basketball coach, famously said, "Do not mistake activity for achievement." Mm-hmm. And I think about that all the time. And I think in the case of carrier diversification, and frankly, a lot of the topics from today, right? There's all sorts of initiatives that we can explore, and they all sound like great ideas, right? But just because there's a lot of activity in your shipping program as it relates to vendors and diversification and strategies and technologies, just because there's activity, that doesn't mean you're achieving anything that's actually aligned with your end goals. So.
And to that concept, I want to take a second and give some very specific advice. If you have a relatively small shipping spend, and well, that relative is a relative word, you can still often, if you're primarily FedEx, primarily UPS, you can often add the United States Post Office because it works well when we talk about carrier rationalization. Now, diversification is just adding more, right? We do this in our stocks all the time. You do it in your 401k. You try to broaden and spread your risk, right? But you also, as that implies, you also miss the chance to actually gain a lot. If you are a very small shipper, the United States Post Office is a very easy secondary carrier to add in the United States. The reason I say this is because that means you're going to be too deep on every address. You can use your primary carrier and you can use the United States Post Office. You may not be getting everything you want. Maybe you're not going to get the service level that you would expect, but you're going to get the item shipped. So when we talk about about carrier rationalization. We are talking about backup coverage. We are talking about potential sweet spots for costs. We are talking about actual time in transit. We are talking about all of these features of a carrier. And generally, what we don't want to see for any, even if we have $100 million logistics spend, knowing that you are 5 deep for a given address isn't exactly good rationalization for your carriers. Okay, so this is why I say the simplest one to add is generally the United States Post Office, because it delivers everywhere. Okay, and that's what I usually see for our smaller customers. That's their first rationalized, diversified carrier. So that would be my advice to Jody and anyone else who has a similar question. Taylor?
All right. Well, more housekeeping. So if you haven't submitted a question, you have one, now is the time to do so. Please do that. If you forgot to submit something, you can ask something in the chat and not be anonymous, or ask something in Q&A and be totally anonymous. So please do that. We have a couple more things to roast that have come in. But right now I want to get to final advice from our panelists, and then we'll go into some of that Q&A. So Michael, let's start with you. What should shippers be doing for 2026? What's one thing you would recommend?
Yeah, well, I mean, sitting on the parcel spend management side of the table, what we're experts at is taking all of the data associated with all of the shipping activity and then figuring out, hey, are we measuring the right stuff? How are we monitoring what matters forward, and how are we using that data to optimize? And so, the end of a year is a great time to really figure out, hey, do I have the right strategy around data and around my metrics? And so what I'd encourage anyone on this call to do is, measure what matters, right? Get the right metrics in place. You can't manage what you don't measure. And at the end of the day, this stuff is really simple. It really is simple. I mean, simple does not mean easy, so don't hear me wrong there. But in terms of what you're measuring downstream, right? You're measuring service levels, weights, package dimensions, lanes, zones, surcharges, transit time, on-time performance. I mean, every parcel shipper has the same KPIs. You might slice them a little differently or add in a few business-specific metrics, but the key cost and performance drivers are going to be the same for every parcel shipper. So if you don't have a way to measure all of the KPIs I rattled off, we need to have a conversation, right? Because once you start measuring those things, you can start avoiding some of the pitfalls that we've described today. You can start building out more robust strategies to support your business objectives, and you can monitor. Monitoring doesn't only work in reverse, it also works forward, right? You want to model forward your data in light of GRI, plan changes to your volume and network, and then you can actually use that data to optimize, get better pricing, diversify your carrier base, and even implement, multi-carrier software like Justin was describing, the Cadillac software, of course, Justin. So I'd just say if you don't have the ability to do any of what I just described heading into 2026, then let's have a conversation.
All right, Jamin, you're up. What would you say?
Well, what I tend to do this time of year, I start thinking about my New Year's resolutions, and one of them is always sit down and think about, with a clean sheet of paper, what is the right configuration for my shipping for 2026 or whatever year that my customer needs. So it has nothing to do with my yesterday's investments. It's what's the right thing that I'd start with the customer and just work backwards from that. Am I shipping too slow for my customer, or am I do I need to figure out how to bring my costs down, and then start backing into a strategy from that? What do I need to do to serve my customer better? And a lot of times there's a technology component to that, and it's almost always, in fact. And then there's probably a carrier relationship component to that. Am I over diversified, or do I need to start to spread my volume around and get better backup options on the table? And then, of course, where should I be bringing AI into the mix to empower me to serve my customer better? Not AI for its own sake, but what does it do for my customer, and how does it help me serve my customer better? That's really what I'm thinking about right now.
Great advice. All right, Justin, you're up.
So clearly, I'm going to advise everybody go out and buy an AI-powered Porsche 911. Okay. Because we have
Knew
to
it was
AI
going to be
all
a
of this.
car reference.
Yeah, I was going to say Honda Accord, but no, seriously. I always look at if you want to have a successful company, you have to have a good enterprise software stack. You have to have that ability to know where your sources of data are, how they should flow, and then we can think about what do we want to do with that data, right? It's very helpful to know where our data is so we can provide partners like Reveal, like Jamin's company, that data so that they can do their jobs. It's very important when you're trying to actually execute something which needs data-driven business rules to know where is the master source of that data if I'm shipping internationally, if I'm shipping dangerous goods, if I'm shipping something like that. So as a systems thinking guy, I always think about the system first because we can put a really great piece of software inside a poor system, and it may not work as well if we apply, I'm sorry, it would work better if we applied some very clear principles of separation of concerns inside the rest of that enterprise software stack. Taylor?
Thank you. All right. Awesome advice from all of you. I just put in the chat. Now is your last chance to put questions in. Ask anything, please do. But there is one submission that we got that was very, very particular. And I thought it would be great to roast without making any modifications. So here it is. Right now, we are in the process of using a vendor to help with contractual gains. Our current state is having 3 different workstations, UPS, FedEx, USPS, and using brokers for our LTL shipments. I would also like to note that our FedEx software is out of date. Our World Ship stations are all set up differently at each facility, and there's a lot of tribal knowledge that is undocumented, which leads to other issues. That is a lot to unpack, but Justin, would you like to try first?
Yeah, like I said when I first saw this one, you don't have a shipping process. You have an exercise program, right? You got to run from system to system. If you want to check carrier A versus carrier B, let alone LTL, which you got to run into the office to check, you definitely do not have a true solution. You have an exercise program. So clearly, there are a lot of other multi-carrier shipping softwares out there that can bring this all into one location. Yes, maybe the ROI is not there to bring small parcel together with LTL, and so that's a big area where you may push off to later. But still, within those 3 carriers that you're using already, any multi-carrier shipping software will now make it not that you have 3 different stations to ship, the 3 different stations to ship, one for each carrier, but you'll have 3 different stations to ship any carrier. Okay, so you just gotta look at that and go, am I really wanting to get my 20,000 steps in for the day, or do I want to make a profit?
Anybody else want to try?
No, I mean, that was a great response, Justin. I think that's probably a longer conversation than we have time for here, right? But I mean, we've got 3 components. There's strategy, there's execution, and then there's analysis downstream. And I think all 3 here could require some or could benefit from some further discussion and review. So would be happy to participate in that discussion further.
Great. All right. Looks like we have time for one more. Here's another one that came in. And I think at ProShip, we've had this experience quite a bit. But there is a shipper who launches new systems and processes, or tries to, right before peak season, oftentimes skipping the adequate amount of testing time that we usually recommend, and assumes everything will work out just fine, and gets mad if you're unable to do it on time. Who's had experience with this? Because I've heard stories.
Don't do it. Don't do it. Yeah, do anything but that. Yeah, it really depends on, the seasonality of your business, of course, right? There are some rare companies that are counter seasonal, I guess, where, they have quiet Q4s, and congrats to them. But for all of us retailers out there, no, that's don't do it. Get your testing done. Break things in March, not in November. If your warehouse breaks in March, you can survive it for a couple weeks, but you can't do that in September, October, November.
Mike, you want to go?
No, I think that was great. Yeah, nothing to add.
Having been in this for a while, if you're watching this on YouTube later, look for our seasonality, our compression testing. We've got other things about this. Here's the reality: there are ways to test everything. Okay, there are ways to test volume. You can not ship for the first 6 hours of a day and try to do 2 hours at the same speed that you would normally need to for a regular peak season day. And it doesn't matter what time of the cycle you're in. You could be pool supplies, so you're busy first part of the year. You can be school supplies, so you're busy at the bottom of the year, so on and so forth. There are ways to go about. There are very great plans out there to go through requirements gathering, which is what you should be doing now. You should have a notebook. You should be saying what worked, what didn't, what shouldn't we remove. So when you get to January, if you're a Q4 peak, you can remember, and this is an every week thing, you can remember what worked so you don't throw it away. One of the biggest problems I see with my customers is they get to January, February, and they're like, throw everything out. No, you're throwing out the good things as well with the bad things. So know what you need. Watch those videos on how to plan through. It's like a six segment cycle that you need to go through, which can include compression testing and other things to ensure that you don't go into peak without those edge cases tested. So that would be my final advice, and I get really heated about that because I've talked about it for a long time. So with that, I'm gonna stop complaining and turn it over to Taylor.
That's all right. Thank you guys so much. Thank you everyone who joined us today. Really appreciate it. Really appreciate the questions. If we didn't get to you, we will get to your question after this. We'll email you or something. If you have any feedback or anything else, let me know. Were we too harsh? Not harsh enough? Let us know. I think that's all I got. So until next time, really appreciate it. Reach out to these experts directly. They're awesome. They're awesome at what they do. So please do that. Don't be shy. And again, thank you so much.
Thanks, guys. A lot of fun.
It was fun.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks all.